In this chapter, we have a couple of learning objectives. So first of all, we will learn the difference between credit risk and sovereign risk. Then we will discuss different forms of sovereign risk, particularly debt repudiation and debt rescheduling. Then we will see how we can measure sovereign risk of a country. So in fact, we will discuss how we can evaluate a country's risk profile. And last of all, we will see different ratios that indicate financial health of an economy. So a small background, first of all. In the 1970s, the United States and European banks and other financial institutions rapidly expanded their operations, their lending to Eastern European, Latin American, and also other less developed countries. This was largely to make these countries' demand for funds beyond those provided by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, and to facilitate their development and to allow commercial banks to recycle petrodollar funds from huge dollar holders such as Saudi Arabia. In many cases, these loans have been made with a little judgment about either the credit quality of the sovereign country in which the borrower resided or whether that body was a government-sponsored organization or private. Eventually, there was a debt repayment problem. The debt repayment problems of Poland and other Eastern European countries was found at the beginning of 1980s, and the debt moratoria announced by Mexican and Brazilian governments in the autumn of 1982. Debt moratoria means the declaration of delay of interest and principal payment. After this debt repayment problem, particularly by the Eastern European countries and some of the Latin American countries, many US banks that had large exposure in those countries had a particularly large loss, and they have a large loss loan reserves. Notwithstanding their experience with LDC's lending, LDC means less developed countries lending a decade earlier, global financial institutions began once again to invest considerable amounts in these emerging markets countries in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And eventually, a debt repayment problem again was observed in Mexico, and there are a few other Middle Eastern and Southwest Asian countries. For example, you can see a default of Argentina in early 2000, Ecuador in 2008, Dubai in November 2009, Iceland in March 2010. And obviously, all of you know about the repayment problem of different countries, particularly after the global financial crisis in 2007, 2008, and also after the European sovereign debt crisis. These recurring experiences confirm the importance of assessing the sovereign risk of a borrowing country before making lending or other investment decisions, such as buying foreign bonds or equities. So in this chapter, we are mostly discussing about the sovereign or country risk. So first of all, we need to understand clearly what's the source of sovereign risk. So in understanding the sources of sovereign risk, we will essentially understand the difference between credit risk and sovereign risk. So to understand the difference between sovereign risk and the credit risk on a loan or a bond, let's consider what happens to a domestic firm that refuses to repay or is unable to repay its loan. The lender will probably seek to work out the loan with the borrower by rescheduling its promised interest and principal payments on the loan into future. Rescheduling means the borrower will be allowed more time to repay probably, and a different package of paying interest and principal, and probably interest payment is delayed for some time. However, if the borrower is still unable or unwilling to repay the interest and principal, I mean, this continued inability or unwillingness to pay would likely to result in bankruptcy proceedings and eventual liquidation of the firm assets. Now, consider a possible situation. A dollar loan is made by an Australian financial institution to a private Greek corporation. I mean, its borrower is a foreign borrower. Suppose that this first-class Greek corporation always maintained its debt repayments in the past. However, the Greek economy and the Greek government's dollar reserve position are dramatically weakening. As a result, Greek government refuses to allow any further debt repayment to be made in dollars to outside creditors. This put the Greece-based borrower automatically into default, even though when viewed on its own, the company is of a good credit risk. The Greek government's decision is a sovereign or country risk even in large part, independent of the credit standing of the individual loan to the borrower. Further, unlike the situation in many developed countries where the lender might seek a legal remedy in the local bankruptcy courts, there is no international bankruptcy court. I repeat, there is no international bankruptcy court to which the lender can take the Greek government in the case that Greek government declares that nobody, no Greek company or individual will be allowed to repay loan in terms of dollar. That is, the lender's legal remedies to offset a sovereign country's default or moratoria decisions are very limited. So you understand one thing, that in the case of a foreign country decision in terms of lending or in terms of issuing a bonds, it involves two steps. First, lenders must assess the underlying credit quality of the borrower, and it would do for a normal domestic loan, including setting an appropriate credit risk premium or credit limits. Secondly, and which is particularly unique or important for a foreign lending or foreign investment, lenders must assess the sovereign risk quality of the country in which the borrower resides. Should the credit risk or quality of the borrower be assessed as good, but the sovereign risk is assessed as bad, the lender should not make the loan. Okay, so that's the introduction or a small background about sovereign risk and the sources of sovereign risk. In the next video, we will discuss the different forms of sovereign risk. Particularly, we will understand the difference between debt repudiation and debt rescheduling. Thank you very much.